think we're going to start now. We'll keep admitting people as they arrive, but welcome everybody. It's great to have you all here with us tonight. Really good to see you. Hi. My name's Nicola Bartlett. I'm a doctor in my day job and a gardener in the rest of my life. So I'm one of the directors of the National Forest Gardening Scheme, along with 7 other people. As I say, great to have you all with us. So this is the second of our seminars, focusing on well-being and designing forest gardens and delivering forest gardens in healthcare settings. So basically, this year we've got a theme as part of our community interest company, and really we at the National Forest Gardening Scheme feel quite strongly about the potential of forest gardens for well-being, improve our well-being, and really we're focusing on that this year. And our winter seminar series, of which this is the second of 4, is focusing on the potential, exploring the potential really of this concept of well-being forest gardens in healthcare settings. So welcome everybody. I've got a few technical things that I just need to run through. So first of all, could you all stay on mute throughout the seminar until, except obviously in the breakout rooms or during times when you're wanting to ask questions. And that just makes it easier to hear each other. I'm sure you know all of this because Zoom has kind of become part of our daily life over the last 8 months or so. The session is going to be structured with a 5-minute introduction, that's now, and then 15 minutes our first speaker and 15 minutes our second speaker. And then there'll be a bit of an introduction to the breakout rooms, and then 20 to 25 minutes in the breakout rooms, and then an opportunity for questions and reflections after that. So before we kick off, I'd just like to read to you a quote to kind of sort of set the scene and the tone for the session, and hopefully make us all feel a bit sort of good about what's coming. And this is a quote that's got a bit of a story to it. And I do a walk locally in a place called Rainbow Woods, which is about 5 miles up the road from where I live. It helps me just to get a bit of headspace to get up on top of some hills and just be able to overlook Beth, which is close to where I live. And carved into the back of one of the benches that I walked past, I came across this quote, which is a quote from Eleonora Duse, who was an Italian actress back in the late 1800s. And I just thought this was lovely, so I thought I'd read it to you. So, if the sight of the blue skies fills you with joy, if a blade of grass springing up in the fields has the power to move you, if the simple things of nature have a message that you understand, rejoice, for your soul is alive. I'd just like to introduce our 2 speakers now. So Carole Longden is our first speaker, and Carole was founder of the Forest of Heart organisation, which is based up near Stratford, and she's been quite inspirational in developing forest gardens in healthcare settings, but I think also in other settings for 5 years now. And it's really quite inspirational, the story that you're going to hear from Carole. And our second speaker is Beth Morgan, who lives up in the northeast, and is going to tell us about a garden that she's developed in Calderdale. I think her garden is called, let me get this right, Trees for Wellbeing. That's a hospital thing, but she's also done work in doctors' surgeries, elderly care homes, and supported accommodation. So a wide range of forest gardens in healthcare settings. But I'm going to leave you to listen to both Carole and Beth, and I'll tell you their own stories. Over to Carole, sorry.
Thanks, Nicky. Thanks for the invite. Evening, everybody. Greetings from a very wet and dark Warwickshire. We're Stratford Upon Avon, not London Stratford. And what I'd like to do is to give you an insight into what we've been doing in the 2 hospitals there, and give you more of an understanding as to why we're doing what we're doing. So I think Hannah is going to share some slides. Oh, yes, that's good. Okay, so I'm one of the founders of the Forest of Hearts, and we set up initially to create a forest garden on a 5-acre site in Stratford. So far we've planted the hedgerow, so it's a 30-year project, and that's a long way to go. As we were doing that, we were meeting people that wanted to work with us that couldn't get to the site because there's no public transport, and many people that we work with don't have cars. So we set about trying to find a site in town in Stratford Upon Avon, and we're very fortunate to meet a woman called Emma, who was the head of the Wellbeing Centre, and that's where we're based now. Next slide, please. Sound like Boris. Next slide. Okay, so my talk is about the why we're doing what we're doing, and a personal reason why is my brother died 5 years ago with mesothelioma, so it was not a pleasant death, and he was only 58. And he wanted to create some woodland, and he left some money, and we thought, well, we'll do that then. So that's kind of the impetus. The other personal reason is when I used to look out of my bedroom window when I was about 10, I lived near Oldham. I could count 17 mill chimneys and not see a tree. And I always wanted to kind of move to somewhere that was leafy. So I'm fortunate enough to be in leafy Warwickshire, but that's why I've got a Mancunian accent. Next slide, please. Okay, our social impact is we work in 3 areas. We work with a number of groups. We've got 61 volunteers. Many of them came to us from Citizens Advice, Department of Work and Pensions, the IAPT team, and we work on projects designed to improve health and well-being. Clearly, the forest garden side of it is about conservation of the natural environment. And what we do is work with edible perennial plants in order really to create a rich biodiverse ecosystem that is pleasant to be within. We also provide training opportunities, and one of our main aims is to help people get into employment by volunteering with us, if that's what they want to do. So next slide, please. Okay, we did a social prescribing project with Warwickshire County Council, funded by them. And it was in this beautiful garden in the centre of Stratford, and clearly that garden is already created. And what we wanted to do was to create something that was near to a healthcare setting. So next slide, please. I was attending a conference in the conference room. You can see it behind the people standing in the circle. And the conference was about health and well-being and what we could do to improve mental health. And it just struck me that that patch of lawn needed something doing to it or with it. And if Hannah could click the video, that will describe where we went from there. Thanks, Hannah. All right, so we created that little video to speak to people about what we were doing. And next slide, please.
Blue hydrangea, cold cash divine.
Good music. So these are the aims, these are the reasons why we created this, and our aim was to do that without any cost to the trust or the hospital. And so we worked with a group of people, and those were our aims. Primarily was to grow food for the Wellbeing Hub, and we grow herbs and so on. Not all of it is used at the Wellbeing Hub. That's another story. We wanted to work with volunteers, so we started off with 12, we've now got 61. And our aim was to engage with local corporates so that we could help them meet their corporate social responsibility goals in relation to the sustainable development goals. So that was our high level reason why. Next slide, please. So we thought, well, how are we going to do that? And we contacted the Malvern Spring Festival, and they said, oh, you can come and work on our herb gardens. And so they offered us the 4 herb gardens, and we could go and exhibit there and talk about what we were doing. Next slide, please, because what that did was give us the chance to play with Fruit Tree Guild concepts. Highlight of my year was I met Monty, or he met me. It was clear that when people sat in that garden, the effect on them, it slowed people's pace down, and the notion of people just enjoying being in a beautiful space with beautiful plants. Next slide, please. So the Malvern crew were very good. They gave us all the plants that we put in there. So we had £4,000 worth of plants that we could bring back. And we met Phil, the guy here, who created the raised beds for us. He was working with BAM Construction, and he was at the Spring Festival, and isn't it amazing how those things work? And he said, yeah, we'll do it, and it will be an apprentice project. So again, that met another one of our reasons why we do things, because in a week, 5 apprentices under Phil came and they created the raised beds. Absolutely brilliant project. Next slide, please. So we looked about, okay, so how can we then engage the local corporate people, because we wanted to get some funding in. So we created a team challenge, and the teams from the local organisations came and planted in a day and paid for the honour of doing that. Next slide, please. Okay, so the, oh no, go on, it's meant to do that. So here are some of the slides from that day, and that was a fabulous day of working with our volunteers, and each organisation owned a little one of the raised beds, and we got our patron David Bradley, Filch in Harry Potter, if you know him. So lots of people contributed, and made for a great day, and got the news out there about what we were doing. Next slide, please. And now we have an edible garden, and there are seats on the front of those, and that was just so well used. Unbeknownst to us, it was perfect 2 meters apart from each bed there. It wasn't designed that way, so people could sit and eat their lunch. So staff, visitors, and patients. So that was the edible garden created, and that's where we're based now. Next slide, please. Why we do what we do as well is to give people a chance to develop their own skill, their confidence. Many people come to us because they've been isolated, they don't have that many contacts outside, and people just come and do what they want to do within the garden. In our setting, everybody registers as an NHS volunteer. The beauty of that is that we get all the appropriate health and safety training, DBS checks, and so on. Next slide, please. So our next phase is this wonderful piece of land, which is behind the car park, that won't be built on for some time yet. And what we're doing there is creating the kitchen garden, and that is used for propagation and so on. Next slide, please. So for us, it's a teaching area, and that's a plan of what it looks like. So it's fairly formal, but we're doing that because when we spoke with the staff, what they wanted was somewhere away from the hospital that was peaceful and quiet, that they could sit down and have their lunch. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's some of the crew, and we created, the polytunnel was donated by the guy second from the left, Nick, who owns the Market Garden Company, Vale Fresco. So yeah, I mean, it's been great. People contribute because they want to, and they're pleased to see something happening at the NHS that hasn't cost anything. Next slide, please. Okay, so then we started to think, oh, how can Forest of Hearts help? So what is it we're doing? And it's only now that it's become fairly apparent that actually we do quite a lot of things. And Beth, I know, is going to tell you how she does gardens in this way. And you will appreciate there's quite a lot of background work before something like that gets created. So next slide, please. All right, so we've got this patch of grass, and we have exercise classes, so we have it as a place to play as well as do gardening. Next slide, please. Okay, we have lots of corporate sponsors, and without them we wouldn't have been able to do it, because they're the ones that provide the money to support the projects. Next slide, please. All right, so the actual stories are about people, aren't they? And James has been with us now over the last year or so, and that's his story. Next slide, please. Mark came out of the army 22 years ago, hadn't worked, and now he's created our beds for our potting benches. He told us he was a carpenter, he wished he'd never told us. And now he's created more raised beds at the back, and just is an integral part of the team. And that's for him why he does it. Next slide, please. As I said, many of the people that work with us are referred from the Improving Access to Psychological Therapy, I think I've got that right. And for most of them, it's a chance to get out and do things and get fitter. Next slide, please. That's on our website, so it's what we do. I won't bore you with that. The next slide, please, gives you an indication of who our funders are. So getting funding is a job in itself, and I'm more than happy to share any of this with anybody. Next slide, please. I'm just looking at the time, I've got 7 seconds. We rely on a lot of support from a lot of organisations out there, and I would highly recommend Social Farmers and Gardening. Oh, that's my 15 minutes. And the next slide, and let's turn that off now, is we're creating 3 gardens at Warwick Hospital. Next slide, please. And so the final slide is, I'm just going to throw this away, hold on. It's lessons for replication, and the things I would suggest are be clear on purpose, and there are multiple purposes for any garden in a healthcare setting. Be clear that the place is the place that you want, and that the people within that place actually want it. the people involved, there are so many people to involve, but volunteers are kind of fundamental to us. We work back from the Sustainable Development Goals, so the planet is really one of the underlying reasons why we do what we do. Find the people who can pay for it, I guess, is a lesson, and also make time to play, because, you know, if you're not doing that, then it can all be quite difficult. So time to play and build that in. And I think that is my final slide. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Carole.
Thanks.
So we're going to go straight on to Beth's presentation. Please do keep putting all your questions in the chat. We'll try and answer what we can as we go along, and store maybe what we can't, which we'll maybe explore after the breakout rooms. But do please keep going with the questions in the chat, and we'll do what we can to answer them as we go along. Thank you. And welcome, Beth.
Hi, everybody. Yep, I'm Beth. I run a project called Rooting and Fruiting. So we are a social enterprise, basically a limited liability company with a not-for-profit element to it. And we primarily do permaculture related projects, but we started as a mushroom growing enterprise, growing edible and medicinal mushrooms and focusing on local strains and on bioremediation. And we went into forest gardening in hospital settings as our kind of route out of mushroom growing, but to try and extend some of our mushroom growing so that people could experience them actually in biodiverse gardens. So I'm going to explain a little bit about one small aspect of our kind of projects in healthcare settings, which is a staff wellbeing garden at Calderdale Royal Hospital. So we set up a project called Trees for Wellbeing, which was all about planting edible forests and cultivating health, quite simply. We began this project in 2015. We were asked to take some funding to do some forestry type work in an urban setting by a Canadian company that was putting money into the UK at the time for urban forestry, and we got that through Community Forest Trust or Manchester City of Trees, because we had a partnership with them already. And we also had a relationship with Calderdale Royal Hospital through some incredible edible project work we'd collaborated with. So can you go on to the next slide, please? So the reason I took the offer of some funding was because I had spent a long time in and out of hospitals myself for about 10 years after a trip to India, and got a nasty health condition that just kind of spiraled out of control. And when I moved to Calderdale in 2011, I was kind of going in and out of Calderdale Royal Hospital for treatment for an eye infection that just wouldn't go away. And I felt quite sad, really, that Calderdale Royal Hospital had a history of having kind of food production on site, like a lot of hospitals used to. And the site was actually really exciting, but felt a little bit staid, and it wasn't really used by patients very much. And my background in a number of things, I've done a lot of art-based work, so I'm a trained graphic designer. I have worked in therapy for a long time, so I've done a lot of like arts and gardening in therapeutic settings. And when I started my business, I wanted to focus on engaging people in food production, medicine production, and this just seemed like the right time to put something back into a hospital setting that had done so much for me over a long period of time. So I have a passion for plant medicine. I've trained in plant medicine, and someone who helped set up our projects, our business in West Yorkshire, is a plant medicine specialist, and also does a lot of fungi related work. And so I was hoping that, being the kind of person that goes against the grain slightly, could also subvertively put in some plant medicine into the sort of normal NHS medical treatment and start to engage staff and patients in a different way in how they could extend their therapy. So I have background in permaculture and, as I said, therapy and arts, and a lot of what we do is try and build a story around our gardens. And we do that by doing a lot of co-design work. So we actually didn't really know what our garden would look like, where it would be and who we'd be working with. And we set out over about a 6-month period to start to look at what that would entail by interviewing patients, staff, and looking at the kind of local context, talking to the gardeners that were already working within the hospital. And over that period of time, we kind of worked out that actually what would be really beneficial was a staff wellbeing garden, not just sort of patient therapy. So we looked at a number of sites and we got a site for a staff wellbeing garden, which was kind of tucked away and hidden away and not our most chosen spot, but we had a lot of issues around facilities companies and sort of access to sites and things. And Calderdale Royal Hospital is a private investment hospital, which makes things very complicated in terms of doing projects with external organisations. And there was a lot of background work around working with land management companies or owners of the land, and around how we could make it cost effective, because often we have to go through a lot of private companies to develop anything on site. So our story for this garden was really around the fact that staff were suffering at the hospital. They were not really getting time out from their day. They needed to enjoy their food and their breaks. They weren't eating well. A lot of people were overweight. And if they were doing their kind of work and kind of reporting or anything, it was often in rooms that didn't have any light. So that was really our background story. And Calderdale Hospital has a really rich allotment close by and has this beautiful story of how, you know, nurses used to go out and pick potatoes and take them back to their patients. So we started to develop our garden really around that. And the other thing was I had a point to prove in my own personal work, which was that forest gardens are really beneficial because they are low maintenance gardens. And I wanted to create something that wouldn't take a lot to maintain, but would still be abundant and rich. And obviously we had this amazing opportunity to go in at Calderdale Royal Hospital. So that's how our work started. Next slide, please. So you can't see the, I'm going to show you a little clip anyway of the staff wellbeing garden. So we did a garden within the mental health unit. Oh, hang on, one sec. Yeah, we did a garden within the mental health unit focused on occupational therapy sort of training, and we worked on like a mini forest garden structure because they had very little space. And within that, we use kind of this idea of the art of tea, so tea drinking and herbs and things from the trees that could then be used inside to work with patients to engage with them with the gardens. And that's a lot of what we do, is looking at kind of ways that we can capture people's imagination in therapy and take them then outside into the garden and vice versa. And we also did a very long project with the inpatient therapy team, specifically around stroke rehabilitation, to design and develop a inpatient therapy garden. We've actually struggled to bring that to fruition, but we have all the design work and a massive toolkit on engagement, which I will share with you all at some point, but that's not my focus today. The focus is the secret garden, and that's obviously the staff wellbeing sensory garden that we just discussed. And it's actually a very small garden. It's meant to be 1/3 of an acre site, but I think it's much more than that. And currently it's a little forest garden with 9 trees, and it's got 9 guilds, each with their own story. And what we wanted to do was create those guilds so that they were their own miniature gardens that people could engage with and also tend to. So we had volunteer teams that would actually go in and just look out after small segments of those gardens. And each of those was ID'd with a clear boundary of a low growing plant. So each guild you could go up and identify quite directly. Okay, you can put the video on now.
Here we are stood at Calderdale Royal Hospital in the staff wellbeing garden, otherwise known as the secret garden. Sometimes being office based, it's nice to get out of the office just to spend a little bit of time to reconnect with the outside rather than being in such a clinical environment. For those patients that can't actually get out into the open, they can actually view from the sensory garden, so they can actually still see the flowers blowing in the breeze and soak in all the wildlife really, because obviously we get the bird table, so that we have lots of birds that attend the garden. It's just nice to get back to nature, isn't it really? Yes, and we've also learned about the different types of plants and flowers in here, from the 12 different species of mint to all the lavender, the blueberries, the lime that attracts the bees. And being surrounded by nature and some greenery, away from like the concrete and the busyness of life, I think it's really important in the healing.
Hannah, can we just go back to the last slide? Is that okay? So yeah, our secret garden is currently looked after by the facilities team at the hospital and a very small team of staff members who took it as a priority for them to look after the garden. And in the last year, it's only had about 13 hours of work on the garden, still very abundant. So it's nice to see that it can be appreciated as a very, very low maintenance garden. Okay, you can move on. So this is the site of the garden. It was originally an old X-ray department full of concrete and just a little bit of topsoil really. So it wasn't a particularly like rich garden, although there was some kind of nice plants growing within the garden already. And when I got involved with this project, I actually asked my permaculture teacher, who's Thomas, who's here today, to come and co-design the project with me. So Thomas came and kind of measured out and listened through my ideas and put some input into it. So if you move on to the next slide, you can start to see some of the design that we put together. So as part of the permaculture analysis, we did the people mapping, which was all about engaging with what the people wanted for the site. So that was a lot of work with staff. And mainly that was a quiet place with lots of biodiversity, which was quite interesting for us because we never really anticipated that people would go for biodiversity as a direct link to their health, even though that's quite obvious for anyone working in kind of gardening. And we did some site mapping. So we did all the measurement structures. We looked at what plants were already there. We looked at kind of, it was quite a hilly site. So thinking about how people would access it was quite an issue. We looked at what plants people wanted and what we wanted to put into that. And then we also looked at kind of engagement ideas. So how is the site going to be used? What did we want to do with staff? What did we want to do with patients? How would they access that at different times of the day? Because we wanted to make sure that staff felt that it was their space and not necessarily patients all the time. Okay, next slide. So we took this focus basically. We wanted a meeting and teaching space, so we created a very small area for people to sit and enjoy the space, and ideally long term that would be undercover. We wanted it to have a sensory element and be accessible for people who had mobility issues. So the site's actually not accessible for most people with a disability, but we do have this seated area where people who are disabled can get on, sit, and they can enjoy and see the whole full array of the garden. And within that section there's a nice picking area. We've got like 12 mints in the garden. We've got lots of textured leaves. Obviously because it's a forest garden, there's so much structure to that garden that there's always something to pick and choose from that people can engage with, which is really nice. We wanted a picking element, so we've got a lot of people from the kidney dialysis team that come and do a lot of picking in our garden. So they'd pick the blueberries and the herbs to take away. And what's really nice is we've actually had a lot of the Pakistani nurses and the Indian nurses come and do a lot of the picking of the herbs, and they've really benefited from that, because a lot of those nurses live in flats and this is like their extension of their home garden. There's a lot of areas of quiet contemplation. We built in a willow seating area that would be a place that people could look out over onto one of the kind of hills in Halifax, which is quite pretty. And a lot of people sit in the grass in summer and they take the opportunity to kind of get away or sit in small groups. We wanted something that was eye-catching, so there's loads of colour in the garden. There's lots of different varieties of apples. Some of them are very bright in colour. And then obviously the wildlife's been a real focus. So we've got like bird feeders and we've put stuff out for different birds. There's a whole kind of guild based on encouraging bees into that area. So it's got like a lime, for instance. Okay, next slide. I'm kind of going to rush through the latter part of this talk. So we started the site by mulching, and this was this is kind of a major principle for permaculture, but for me, this was a major principle for this actual project, because we had very limited resources. We were only given 10,000 for the project, and we'd done the 6 months of work before we even started the gardening and the engagement work. So we got a free delivery of wood chip. We used masses of cardboard from a local organisation and paper from the Halifax Courier, and used that as an opportunity for marketing. So they did a bit of a spread on us. And we created all the kind of garden beds using this mulching principle, so that it was very clearly defined. The hospital could clearly agree what the garden would look like before we started to plant and create the structure, which was also really helpful. We also, sorry, can we go on to the next slide? Sorry, that is my phone. Really sorry. Then we did a lot of the staff engagement. So we started a staff wellbeing group that was run once a month, and we did the first event around tree planting. And we worked with Manchester City of Trees for that. So what we wanted to do is bring in lots of different people from different organisations into the garden. Even though we do tree planting ourselves, we thought it was a nice opportunity for staff, especially staff that were doing work around sustainability or patient therapy and were developing their own horticultural practice, to kind of gain understanding from other people. So we planted all the 9 trees in that day. And you can move on to the next slide. Yeah, and then we did lots and lots and lots and lots of events. So that was kind of our way to engage a larger number of staff. Over the course of a year, we worked with the Food Sustainability Board, the Food Health Wellbeing Board for Calderdale Council. We worked on a joint partnership board that was between the hospital and the local food steering group. And we were part of the inpatient kind of therapy board meetings as well. So everybody kind of knew our face and our personality and what we brought to the hospital, really. And that was a big kind of motivating factor for the hospital to really stay engaged with what we were doing. And we also got involved with a number of different projects, like Eden Communities Project, and their big walk came, visited us. We had memorial ceremonies on the garden, and we planted roses and all sorts of different things. And we worked with Garden Organic and RHS. So there was lots of opportunities for people to see how important horticultural therapy is. Next slide. And one of the important things that, like I said before, was engaging people inside the hospital with the outside, because we weren't really getting lots of access from patients to this particular site. So we did something called the Art of Tea. And we basically provided teas made of herbs from the garden, and we did a little bit of arts with people in the foyer of the hospital. So we'd sit there for a whole day, engaging people, chatting, drinking random teas that they'd never drank before, and talked about what gardens mean to people. It was a really simple way of saying to people, we're here, we want to talk to you about the hospital setting, please come and visit our garden. What ways can we get you to visit the garden? And that's our primary engagement within the hospital setting, which was really important for us. Next slide. So that's really the last sort of slide. So this is what the garden sort of looks like now. It's a little bit bigger and bushy. We've got a lot of different raspberry canes and all sorts of things kind of growing up in the garden. And it's used by staff for luncheons, picnicking, relaxing. It's right next to the diabetes centre, so a lot of the people with diabetes access the site. And we had a lovely chat with someone last year who was actually dying from diabetes. And for his last sort of trips to the hospital, he actually used to come and sit within the garden. And I think that kind of story just reminds us like how important these spaces are for people. Sometimes it's just one person that can kind of light it up for you and say, you know, these are the last days of my life, but I've spent it here and it's made a massive difference to me. And we have lots and lots of staff that come and do pick, and we don't do any of that maintenance ourselves anymore. We just let people do that work. And we have waterers, so we have different teams that come and do watering of particular plants that need it, so like the blueberries in summer. But most of this site is looked after by itself. We have the maintenance team who come and remove leaves, and they mow the lawn and they chop a few things back, but that's it. How long have I got left? I've not got long, have I? About a minute. Okay, right. We're going to go skip through some of the things that I've been asked to talk about today. So if we go on to the next slide. Okay, we can go on to the next one. It's all right, I've explained that one. So I'm just going to talk about how to get traction and support really for the project. So we did a lot of co-creation, and I think this is one of the fundamental things really, is to get in and get to know as many people as possible inside and out. So we work with a lot of the Incredible Health Centres work. We've always collaborated with people within Incredible Edible because it's got a lot of traction anyway locally. We do things very differently, but we complement each other. We also work with a number of mental health charities and with things like CCG and public health. Involved therapeutic services, and particularly occupational therapists, are amazing because they have a lot of scope to do work within the garden setting, and they will take on issues around risk management, which is often a problem for patient therapy. Involve external high-level organisations like clinical commissioning groups and public health, because long term that will give you a lot of backing. Join health and wellbeing boards and at least go and do a presentation to inform them of the work, and there are often those running in hospitals on particular issues. We work with Sustainable Food Cities, and they will provide quite a bit of stuff around food growing support, and we're now part of Calderdale Food Charter. Take on events, so we do the Soil Association get-togethers. We do all the Eden Project community stuff like the big lunch and, as I say, the big walk. We've been involved long term with the RHS for their gardening resources, and we looked at developing a in your neighbourhood group, which would be amazing to do longer term for this project, and that's what we're looking to do next year. And use creative organisations to create videos and artwork, and this is a big part of my work anyway because I come from an arts background, but there's a lot of leverage to building in some sort of creative aspect to your project. You know, we go out and take people to do art in the gardens, not particularly at the hospital site, but that's definitely something that could be done. And a plan for one of our kind of connecting the internal and external environment was to do like floristry type stuff where people could take in some flowers to the internal environment, those with like low pollen and things. So yeah, that's the last slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. Thank you. So, I mean, 2 great presentations, really inspiring, and some, I don't know, some quite powerful stories that made me feel kind of, yeah, no, really great. We're going to go straight into our breakout rooms now. We're going to store up your questions that you've put in the chat that we haven't been able to answer yet, and go back to those after the breakout rooms. So we've got about 20 to 25 minutes. There'll be 5 or 6 people in each breakout room, and we're going to use an app called Jamboard, which you're going to post a link to in the chat. I think Hannah's going to do that. And if you just click on that link, that'll bring Jamboard up, which is like a flip chart that you can put post-it notes on. So you should all be able to access that. And you can all individually put your feedback and your post-it notes, or however you want to put it, onto that Jamboard. And there's one sort of flip chart page per breakout room. So if you're breakout room 1, you need to go to flip chart page 1, which is right at the top of the flip chart, just above the flip chart. Breakout room 2, go to flip chart page 2, and just, you know, all your thoughts and reflections and questions, if you just post it onto the Jamboard. Here you go, somebody's got it up for us. Yeah, so we've got 2 questions we'd like you to explore, and I'll post them in the chat so you don't have to remember them. So one is, why would you start a forest garden in a healthcare setting? And the second is, how would you get it started? So that's, why would you start a forest garden in a healthcare setting? And the second is, how would you get it started? I'm going to let Hannah put us all into breakout rooms now, and I'll see you in 20-25 minutes. I hope you enjoyed your breakout rooms and had some interesting and informative discussions. I'm sure you did. I've just extracted a few themes from the questions that were coming through on the chat. Mostly these are questions for Carole and Beth, so hopefully you'll be able to help us with answering some of these. So I think that the first question was for you, Beth. You know what plants have proved popular? And I think that was posted when you were talking about the plants that were being harvested by the staff.
Oh, plants that are popular. Okay, so for just people's choices, because we work with a big volunteer team that also have experience of gardening, and they've got their own personal opinions on what they want to like maintain, look after, etc. But for people, I think they want to see herbs, and they want to see how things taste and feel. And so one of the major things that we do in our garden is we grow 12 different types of mint plants. So there's like chocolate mint, there's alpine mint that's really good for refreshing your breath, but it's like really powerful. You know, we've got mint, normal garden mint, and we separate them all out, and we use that storytelling to kind of engage people in what plants can do and bring to the garden, and what flavors they can bring for people, and what medicinal properties they have. So I definitely think that's the case. Apples, a variety of apples. I think having different varieties of the same type of plants really fascinating for people, because they can start to see how simple gardening is, but what different benefits all these different types of the same plant can have. So, you know, I'm trying to think, like, we have a lot of red currants, you know, black currants, because they're so easy to grow and they're abundant. And also we have like the biodiversity element in that, because the birds will come and like eat them. So then the staff have to get out in the garden regularly to like go and fend off the birds and get to eat some of the berries. So I think anything like that for me is like a joy to teach on, and people can really engage with. And then we just have a lot of flowers within that as well, you know, and we've got a whole wind garden that people wanted to design that had some sound element to it that was therapeutic. So we got people really engaged in, like, you know, have they got any memories of like plants when they were kids, you know, things with big seeds on them and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think there's just so many plants that people love to see. Salads, herbs, easy grow stuff. anything that's got like colour to it. Like people love seeing willow of different species grow in the garden, and yeah, I'm trying to think. That's probably my starting point anyway.
So that's loads, Beth. That's great. Thank you. So another question. This is around funding. And probably a question for both of you, but maybe Carole, you could kick off with this one. So one of the questions was, what responsibilities do the corporates have once they've engaged with the project?
Yeah, well, they don't have any. We don't make them have any. We invite them. So, for example, Box Factory, they will donate £10 for every tree that we plant in our various projects. So, you know, their commitment is over a 3-year period, and that's nice because they know how many we're going to go plant, and we know that they plant based on their sales turnover. So that's a good one. One of the solicitors firms, for them it's an ongoing thing for their team because the team are nearby. With another one, the ongoing thing again is team events, because the company is very much into corporate social responsibility, and they'll put a team in to do anything. They love it. So anything that gets a group of people outdoors in the environment and that benefits the NHS. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Have you got anything to add to that, Beth?
I could probably just mention, like, we just took a very different approach in terms of corporate responsibility, because we wanted anyone that engaged to engage on a longer term basis, although it sounds like Carole's actually have to some extent. But we now work with a local health drink company called Equinox Kombucha that actually employ me to do some permaculture stuff. This is what I tend to do. I tend to work with companies and then try and get them to invest in some other project that I'm doing. So they come and do their team building days on site, which means that we get some bigger maintenance done at kind of key points in the year, and that will be delivered with me. And then they will also put some funding into some new additional plants during that time, so it kind of just freshens up the garden. So we try and do some sort of team building day with an organisation like that 4 times a year, more if we can. Yeah.
And another question that came up a couple of times is around your team structures and how you make decisions, how you've decided what structure your team should have, or what works for you in terms of the people. I don't know, Carole, maybe if you can just describe how it works for you.
How it works. We're a charity, a CIO, Charitable Incorporated Organisation. We work on projects, so each project will have a team devoted to that. And well, once we're clear about the objectives, what we're trying to do, then decision making is based on what needs to happen to make that happen. And the same with the volunteers. Volunteers will come in and it's quite amazing, really, because once people know why you're doing something, most people just jump in and do, I find.
Okay, all right, thank you.
We're very fortunate in that we don't have lots of any bureaucracy, and we're pretty much left to our own devices. Something that may be of interest is we don't actually have a signed contract with the NHS Trust to be on that land, and they didn't want one, and we've held out not to have one, so we might be gone tomorrow. But the garden will be there.
Okay, so it sounds like it's sort of evolves from the ground up, sort of iteratively, yeah. Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to slightly move aside now. We've had a great time listening to the presentations, and hopefully, and I'm sure, because I wasn't in the breakout room, so I don't know how they went, but I presume you had interesting discussions in your breakout rooms. I just want to try and take a little step back and maybe just pause for a minute and just think about what struck you this evening. What's your freshest thinking this evening? Just have a little pause and a think, and if anybody wants to respond to that, just if you put your hand up and turn mute off. Hi, Tammy.
Hello, I said this in the breakout room as well. It was the description of the person dying with diabetes. And I actually had a bit of a cry as that was being expressed. So really what that comes down to is we don't know what a difference we can make to one individual person by our actions. And I think that's just a really good take-home message for everybody. And I really appreciate you sharing that, Beth. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ross.
I really like the fact that you had the 12 types of tea. You had those lovely teapots. I'd love to have that image you did with all the different types of tea, and that you just used that to sort of chat with people and let them taste and sort of bring people in that way. I thought it was lovely and, yeah, inspiring.
Anybody else? I'm just scanning the screen.
Yes, I was struck
Jade.
by the wind garden, and it got mentioned in our breakout group as well, how important sounds can be, how therapeutic they can be, and how that had reminded me of some of the things from our conference about using all our senses in our gardens and how it opens us up. I think having a wind garden, planning things according to how the different things sound in the wind is a really lovely idea. It goes beyond forest gardening, but I think we want all sorts of treescapes for food, medicine, and enjoyment of all kinds.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And I just, Krista, had you still got something to say?
No, I'd finished. I just realised I hadn't put my video on. Sorry, I had meant to speak. Sorry.
Okay. Christopher.
Thank you.
And
I belong to a group called Incredible Edible in Wrexham. And I have to say, I start from the point, having listened to everyone, I'm a complete non-expert. And I actually didn't like gardening in my own personal garden and all that sort of thing. But I very much come from a community angle, and I shared in my group 4 that I think there's for me there's a bit of a political angle, and I don't like seeing people take a bit of that hospital away. Right, they don't use that corner. We can sell that off and privatise and outsource things. But I do like the idea of using spaces that could be in a much more positive ecological and environmental way. And I completely feel strongly that being out part of the community, it's good for the people who are doing that, but it's also the recipients to some extent who then enjoy what is there in a much more positive way. So I just think that it's utilising the spaces that I like. And I was slightly thrown by the reference to forest garden when it's not quite as wild as what I was expecting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. And Sue, did you have something to say?
Well, yeah, I just think I was really interested in listening and seeing all the presentations, and it's given me much needed confidence, especially as I've been so isolated the last, over a year nearly now, to sort of think, the willows are good, all the plants that the 2 people mentioned they were putting in, and all the different mints. I thought, yes, I've got those. Yeah, I'm doing that, and it's just given me a bit of a boost, to be honest, just to hear what everybody's doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
because you can feel very alone in these situations, and of course we can't meet up with anybody and do anything with anybody else. So I feel I'm battling on with it on my own at the moment without the community. So yeah, so that's what I got out of it. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Sue. I'm going to need to draw this to a close. I'm sorry for those people that haven't been able to post their questions, but maybe if you email Hannah or myself, we'll be able to help answer your questions. So thank you all for coming this evening. It's just a reminder that it is the second of 4 seminars. So please do tune in for the other 2 seminars. We've got one, next week's seminars is on garden design for wellbeing, and we've got 2 landscape architects talking, one with a background in permaculture and one with a background in designing specifically for wellbeing. There should be great talks, and then the final one is an open discussion, really drawing together themes that have come out as being of interest in the previous 3 seminars. So please do join us for the next 2 seminars if you can. And just a reminder to say that we're putting these seminars on for free, but if you've really enjoyed them, please do feel free to donate to the National Forest Gardening Scheme, and Hannah's going to put a link in the chat to enable you to do that. Hopefully see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.